to start talking about one of my favorite topics with cooking, and that has to do with function of ingredients. What that means basically is why the ingredients do what they do and how they work together. It's basically a big chemistry experiment. And the best way to show this is through chocolate chip cookies. Why not, right? So what you want to do when you're making cookies first is you want to cream certain ingredients before you begin. And typically you're going to cream your fat and your sugars. Now for the recipe I'm going to show you, we are actually going to use shortening as our fat. Now what fat does is it makes the cookies tender and soft. So you're going to line your dry measuring cup with some plastic wrap. And what I found this does is it just protects your cup so you don't have to clean it as much later. You can use something called the water displacement method, which is what I used when I was in school, but honestly, this is so much simpler. All right, so I'm gonna use a rubber scraper, and I'm going to press 1 cup of shortening into my plastic lined measuring cup. Make sure it's all filled up. Now, what fat does, like I said, is it makes it nice and soft and tender when it bakes. If you use too much, sometimes it'll make your cookies spread too far, okay? Because as it melts, it wants to spread out. Then, all you have to do is plop your shortening out of your cup, and then you can throw the plastic wrap into the trash. So, to our shortening, we're gonna add our sugar. Now, this is kind of fun. We're gonna add 1 cup of white sugar. Now white sugar, you can just scoop right into the container, level it off, and dump it in. There's nothing you have to do unique about it. Now white sugar is dry, and what it's going to do is give you more of a crisp cookie. So I'm gonna add 1 cup of that. Now I'm adding 1/2 of a cup of brown sugar. Now, brown sugar has the molasses in it. So if molasses is like a syrup, it's what you make gingerbread men with. And so if we're adding molasses into our sugar, clearly there's moisture in here. So what kind of cookies are you gonna end up with? Moister, softer, chewier cookies. So if you like a moister, softer, chewier cookie, add a little bit more brown sugar than white sugar. So maybe instead of a cup of white sugar, you would do a cup of brown sugar and only 1/2 cup of white sugar versus 1/2 cup of brown sugar like I'm doing today. Now with brown sugar, because it has that added moisture in it, you need to make sure that you've packed it in. And the way to make sure that your brown sugar is measured accurately is when it comes out molded like a sand castle. We're just gonna plop that in there. Your recipe is going to say to cream your fat and your sugar together. This is an important step. What you're doing is you're aerating that fat and incorporating that sugar into each little particle of fat. All right, so this has been creaming for a couple of minutes. This is not creamed yet, okay? This is just kind of stirred up. So don't stop at this point. This is creamed. This is the look you're going for. Once your sugar and fat mixture is creamed, I'm gonna add my eggs. Now my recipe calls for 2 eggs. And what I like to do is crack them separately into a dish before I add them into my mixing bowl. And the reason I do this is because what if I cracked this into my bowl and there was like a shell that ended up in there, or several pieces of shell? Or what if my egg had a blood clot or something weird going on with it? I wouldn't want to add it. So by cracking it into a dish separately, I can make sure my egg is of exceptional quality before I add it into my mixture. Also, with the eggs, what the egg's gonna do is it's gonna hold it up and kind of give it a little more structure. Now, what some people do to get a softer cookie is they'll add an extra egg. Now you gotta be careful though, because that could add too much moisture. So you gotta make sure you're balancing things out, or even just adding an extra yolk and no white for extra richness and chewiness. So I'm gonna add 2 teaspoons of vanilla just for flavor. Now always remember to measure away from your mixing bowl. Don't measure over it, because if you overfill or spill or whatever, you don't want half the bottle of vanilla in your ingredient bowl. Once our moist ingredients have all been combined over here, we're gonna measure our dry ingredients in a separate bowl. So what you want to do is remember how to measure flour. Now flour is our structure, okay? It's what's going to hold it together. It's kind of like our skeleton or the frame of a house. If you didn't have it, we would just be a puddle of skin and blood on the floor. So we need our structure. Now to measure flour, which is going to be 2 1/4 cups of flour, I'm going to take a spoon and I'm going to lightly spoon my flour into my dry measuring cup. I'm using dry so that I can use my straight edge spatula to level it off and get a nice straight edge. Into my separate bowl it goes. So once I have 2 1/4 cups of flour, I'm going to stir in 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Now baking soda is my leavening agent. If I didn't add this, my cookies would be very, very flat. So if you're making cookies and they turn out very, very flat, check your baking soda if you're using it to make sure it hasn't expired. So this is going to allow it to rise once it's connected with any sort of acid, which the acid in this recipe that activates the baking soda is actually the brown sugar and the chocolate in the chocolate chips. Fascinating, isn't it? So a teaspoon of soda, also a teaspoon of salt. The only thing salt does in recipes, unless you're brining or preserving something, is it adds flavor. So salt is typically always only added for flavor. So this is my dry ingredients. I'm just gonna stir together my flour, baking soda, and salt. Now this is where it gets very serious, guys. Start it on slow. If you turn it up full blast, you're gonna have a powder cloud above your head and your parents will be kind of disappointed in the mess. So nice and slow to start, and then once it's all blended, you can turn it up a little bit until it's completely mixed into your batter. Once the flour is all mixed into your batter and it's nice and smooth, we're gonna get ready to add the chocolate chips. I'm gonna add a 12-ounce bag of semi-sweet chocolate chips. Now, it's kind of confusing because at the store you can buy milk chocolate or semi-sweet, and it's like, what's the difference? How do I know what to buy? Why wouldn't I just buy milk chocolate? Well, sometimes people think that if you use milk chocolate in a cookie recipe, it's just overly sweet, so you can buy semi-sweet. You can choose whatever you want. Mix that in until all the cookies have been dispersed evenly throughout the dough. All right, so my cookie dough looks like this when it's all mixed. Notice it's a kind of a lighter color. If I had used more brown sugar than white sugar, it would have been a little bit dark. I have a cookie scoop. You can also use just 2 spoons, whatever you want, to make sure that your cookies are going onto your parchment paper lined baking sheet evenly. And we always do 12 cookies per baking pan, 3 across and 4 down. The most important thing when putting your cookies on your baking pan is to make sure that each of your cookies are the same size. You wouldn't want one teeny tiny little cookie on your pan right next to a great big cookie on your pan, because what's gonna happen? Yeah, the big one's gonna be still raw in the middle when your small one is getting burnt. So you wanna make sure the size is uniform so that they cook evenly. All right, I have 12 dough balls on my baking pan that's been lined with parchment paper. My oven is preheated to 375 degrees. I recommend only doing 1 pan in the oven at a time. I think it just helps make the cookies bake a little more evenly. And I'm gonna put them in for about 10 to 12 minutes. When your timers go off, you're gonna pull out your cookies and double check to make sure that they are GBD on the surface, also known as golden brown and delicious. I do not recommend taking them off the pan right away. There is still heat on the pan and they're going to kind of help finish the cooking process. As you now understand the function of ingredients and how all the ingredients work together to give you a finished product, you can control what ingredients you're adding to give you your perfect and ideal chocolate chip cookie. Have fun.